Jang la mi ja lao so ran de ne chen ro wer chen ni xiang gang ja wer de ji zhen le ye la men ji men peng zhao jiang lao so ran de gong ji du ban bo re xin ji lo gong ji du ban bo re xin gong ji du ban bo re xin ji lo gang de shu zhi song gen ji ten na de shi lu men ji ra gang 당들 돈 비추지 처럼베 냠브름도 바탐 전들 셔시 아이가 나오로 당노전가 좀 더더메 이르까는 루아 근지 잔음 저점 바탐 저가도 더가 주탄도 남가 담냠 선전 담지지 돈도 단들라나메 바양도 버조버 상지지 고모는 보체 도버샤 디셔드 담비추 가직 산네 돈냠접 롱르 주고 냠비 삼밥 샹좀 줘도 Simultaneous cheter san tsar de la kan sambre chavi chuna devjan shabir san abjupi ngumbrum dopa topi de shanchu san hua tamche ji shopar gyamsu stomba santi ji tsiktor huaran jua ji sha takpa chimbu mdo ya jintian wo men jiang de
So, today we'll begin our classes on the Surangama Sutra. And this is the book of the Tibetan language, Surangama Sutra, which is quite a thick and big book as well. Now we also have a complete version of a Surangama Sutra in Tibetan language. However, the oral transmission I have received is only of the scroll 9 and scroll 10. So far, I have not received the oral transmission of the previous 8 scrolls. Why is that? Why have I not received the complete oral transmission of this sutra then? I think partially it is because of the translation aspect. During the first or the early propagation of the Dharma, according to Bhutan's Buddhism history, he said, according to his opinion, in the early propagation of Buddhism, in fact, the complete book of Surangama Sutra is included. However, after the destruction of Buddhism by the king Landharma, then there was only 2 scrolls left, that is the scroll 9 and 10. However, he did Master Bhutan, that is, around the 2nd century or so, he stated with his prediction, he said that this sutra will be translated back from Chinese into Tibetan. That is the complete version of the Surangama Sutra again. In fact, this is not stated by Master Bhutan, but it is stated by Emperor Qianlong during the Qing dynasty. He, in fact, has this complete text or complete compilation of Surangama Sutra that is made of the 4 languages, that is Manchurian, Mongolian, Chinese, and Tibetan. And at the beginning of this compilation of the 4 languages of Surangama Sutra, the emperor then stated in the prologue, stated the reason. So, rather, it was not the emperor himself, it was Rope Dorje, who is the advisor of the king at that time. So he translated from Chinese into Tibetan again. He then noted in the text that he translated, saying that some of the texts are translated according to the Chinese language or Chinese version. Between the Qing Dynasty or Qianlong's 18th to the Qianlong's 27th year, the text was then translated into different language. Some said that it was then translated in 1772 to 1779. It was translated solely by Ropi Dorji, but this is not really then recorded in the Tibetan text. It was not really stated clearly who the translator was at that time. However, in the current Tripitaka, in the Tibetan version, in fact, in Tibetan language, we have many different versions of Tripitaka as well, such as the Beijing version, the Dege version of Tripitaka, the June Tripitaka, as well as Kuri Tripitaka. However, in the Tibetan language, it is then included in Niri and the Kuri Tripitaka, this complete text of Surangama. However, the oral transmission that we receive is usually from the Dege version of Tripitaka, all the transmissions that we receive. But have I then received from Nietang version of the Tripitaka? Maybe later on I will be able to, but so far I do not have it yet. Therefore, I won't give you the oral transmission until the scroll 9 and scroll 10. But other than that, I do not have the previous 8 scrolls of transmission. I can certainly look into the different translations and compare the different versions, but I cannot give you. I cannot then provide you with oral transmissions. So. So I'll use an hour of time in class to solely give the teaching instead of both oral transmission and teaching for the previous classes before scroll 9 and 10. The teachings compared to Lotus Sutra and Vimalakirti Sutra, in fact, the previous two are very much different than this one, because the other two sutras, in fact, I do have oral transmission. Therefore, I would then give you the oral transmission in Tibetan language, and then I'll give you the teaching in the Chinese language. So that's how I usually give the teaching. So, Surangama Sutra. To me, in fact, this particular text is is requested for me to teach for a long period of time. In fact, I think it's been 2 decades. Many lay practitioners asked me to give the teaching on this. However, I didn't really feel or didn't really know where to start. But back in 2017, somehow I had this urge to give teaching on Surangama Sutra. I then felt this urge that almost like I was ill and looking for a cure. So I've been looking for different kind of transmissions, looking for the texts, and started reading into it with lots of hunger for the content that's included in Surangama Sutra. And all of these are stated in my diary. In fact, I then talked about this for 4 times in my diary. But I know nowadays that there are different kinds of opinions about this particular sutra, including the opinions from different scholars in the West and the East. But I think when people have a discrimination towards the sutra, maybe they have a very biased idea, and their bias did not come from their wisdom. Rather, it comes from other people's opinion. So it was rather a common idea that circulated in the academics that is not based on factual matters. Some of the Chinese scholars, including Liang Qichao, during the early 19th century, he was then very much influenced by certain Japanese scholars. But when I then read into different other masters' teachings, such as Master Nanwei Jing and other great Buddhist masters, I feel that it is in fact quite necessary to give this teaching. And later on, I think I will take the time and explain to you why some of the discrimination towards this sutra is rather biased and very partial. So later on, I'll take the time to explain. I myself, in fact, took lots of time to compare different versions and so on. And I really think that this particular text that is published in Tibetan language is very much reliable. I think it took a great Tibetan research center and a great Tibetan master, Tutamnima. He, in fact, along with his research team, did great research in the Tripitaka, in the Tibetan Tripitaka, and I think last year or a year before, they finally then published this text, published the new version of Tibetan Tripitaka. And I really consider this a whole volume of a new text of Tibetan Tripitaka is then done very meticulously with great effort. In total, I think they have 108 volumes. And these 108 volumes, some of them are only some of them have extensive content, extensive titles, and it would be really of great use for people who want to look into the references and so on. Whatever sutra, whatever shastra that we teach nowadays, I think it's quite necessary to refer back to the previous master's teaching. And I think the Tripitaka that is recognized by great masters who are both learned and gained realization, these kind of teachings are quite necessary for us to study. Because when we look at each other and when we look at the modern people, I don't think our wisdom can be of comparison to those of the masters from the past. Anyhow, I would like to just make this short introduction before the actual class. And this Surangama Sutra, in fact, in the mainland China, it is quite well propagated, and lots of people have great faith towards this sutra. Throughout the history, lots of masters, and especially from a Buddhist point of view, the history, all the way from the Tang Dynasty, many masters, they studied, learned, and taught and made commentaries on this particular sutra. Different masters from many various schools. In fact, despite their schools, they give teachings and propagate the sutra. Unlike other sutras, this teaching is not well propagated as much as the other sutras. I think in Korea, this sutra was translated into Korean language back in 1315, and till now they have over 60 or 70 different versions of translations as well as its commentaries. Because I guess their traditional school of Buddhism is Zen Buddhism, and they place a great importance in this sutra as a Zen school of Buddhism. But other than that, when it comes to Manchurian and Mongolian language, I think there are versions that is translated in their language, but it is not really propagated that widely. In terms of English, Master Xuanhua, he attached great importance in this sutra, and his disciples also then translated this text into English, and same as his commentary. And this teaching is well propagated in the West and other countries. And there's a lay practitioner who practiced in the Sri Lankan center, had translated this text into English. And then that version is also circulated, however, not so widely. I think in the West, this propagation of the Surangama Sutra is not as wide as the other sutras. Some Westerners, I think, because of the influence that comes from the early 19th century, from certain scholars, and then they feel that this is not a particular sutra that they want to invest their time into studying. In Japan, it is translated. I think in Japanese, they do have certain translations as well and editions. There are some scholars who are doing their research on this sutra. In Tibet, Surangama Sutra is different than the Vajrayana Sutra or the Diamond Sutra or the other sutras. So Surangama Sutra is not so well known. I'm just being very honest over here. Some Tibetan Khenpo asked me, saying that, I heard that you're about to give a teaching on a great sutra. What sutra is it? When I told them that it is a Sanjay Huayun Nyundo, then they questioned, saying that, oh, is it included in the Tripitaka? So I think on the Tibetan plateau, it is not well propagated either, although it is included in the Tibetan Tripitaka, but not many people really taught this sutra before. In fact, I do think in Tibet, the teachings on Shastras are more commonly taught than the sutras. There are teachers who do give teachings on the stories of karma and so on, but when it comes to the Surangama Sutra, I don't think it's as well known. Therefore, when I told other people that I'm going to give a teaching on Surangama, and they said, "Oh, is it really included in the Tripitaka?" Some history said that Mahayana came to Tibet with Surangama Sutra as well as the Deepen Sutra, and he originally wanted to propagate Surangama Sutra in Tibet, but because of the causes and conditions are not really mature for such propagation, maybe that's why it is not widely propagated. That could be part of the reason. And how about mainland? How did the Chinese mainland has this text? This story, in fact, is quite famous. And today I really want to then show you or create an auspicious cause for propagating the Dharma. Therefore, I'm going to tell you the story and the history of the propagation of Surangama Sutra to China. Around 585 CE, there was a master whose name is Master Qi Yi from the Tiantai school. And at that time, Master Qi Yi was very well known, very famous. And people would call him Shakyamuni Jr., just as how in Tibet people would call Padmasambhava as the second Buddha. So Padmasambhava is renowned as the second Buddha because his activity is just like the Buddha himself, if not even more. And then the Nagarjuna and Vasubandhu and their activities are quite well known, and there are people who would call them also the second Buddha because of their Dharma activity. Anyhow, Master Qi Yi is like that, so very well known in China at that time. So he was renowned as Shakyamuni Jr., and he was a great master, had a high level of realization. And then once he went to then see another master who was said to have a great realization. And then they started to have this conversation, and Master Qi Yi started to talk about the Samadhi aspect and especially some questions. So he started to pose those questions to that monk who came from India, who was also very high in realization. And then this Indian monk or Indian practitioner started telling Master Qi, saying that your level of realization and the Samadhi is very much like what the Surangama Sutra had taught. And Master Qi had never heard of this. So he started asking, what is this? And this Indian master saying, well, this is a very precious text. This is a precious text that we preserve in our country. And at the beginning, this sutra came from the fifth heaven level, a celestial level. But this sutra is very precious because it comes from rather a Tantrayana aspect of teaching and very secretive teaching. And then there was Nagarjuna, who then went to the Naga palace. He went to the Naga's palace, which also have this text preserved. And then Nagarjuna couldn't bring the text back, therefore he memorized the whole text and then brought it back to the human world. And that's how Surangama was then appeared in human realm. So through this conversation, Master Qi had this full devotion and faith towards the Surangama Sutra. And the questions that Master Qi asked to the Indian master then the Indian master replied or answered all his questions through the aspect of Surangama Sutra, and which resolved all of Chi master's questions and confusion. And at that moment, Master Chi was extremely impressed and felt that it was quite necessary. Just like how nowadays the people, once they heard some good information, they would continue to ask, well, where can I get it? Just like that. So, sometimes when we contemplate how the previous masters again the Dharma text and compared to what we have now, what kind of convenience we have now, I sometimes feel it is quite. I feel quite in awe of the modern technology of how we can then easily gain access to the Dharma text. And then Master Chi said that, can you please bring this text back to our land? And at that time, the Indian master agreed, and he went back to India. So all the way since 585 CE, Master Chi then would stay there and then prostrate towards the direction of India. And he prostrated for 18 years without interruption until he passed away, which is 597 CE. But when he passed away, when Master Chi passed away, by the time he passed away, there was no sign of this sutra being brought back to China. But maybe because of the great master's aspiration and his devotion that created the cause for this text being brought to China. Finally, around 705 CE, this text was brought to China by a great shamana or monk. His name is Pramiti. Pramiti's name means wisdom, or means Pramita. Maybe because of his previous aspiration, or maybe because of he himself is a manifestation of a bodhisattva. I have no idea why, but nowadays we have this opportunity to even look at this text. It is because of his effort and his aspiration. After, in fact, Pramiti heard the story of how Master Chi prostrated and wanted to receive this text, for 18 years, he was extremely touched, and then he vowed to bring this book to China. And the first time, once he received this text from India, he wanted to then cross the border and then come to India. I think at that time, India is then made of many different countries on that continent. So at that time, India, the land India was then made of different scattered of countries. So at that time, Pramiti wanted to take the book to China. However, India did not allow anyone to take the sutras to other places because it was then treated as the most precious thing in their country. So at that time, Master Xuanzang, Master Faxian, they couldn't receive this sutra at that time because it was very much protected and really precious. So once Pramiti reached the border, he could not take the book out or cross the border. Not only he couldn't, he then had to be sent back and then being published. Maybe at that time the commute was not that convenient, and at that time the thing that you cannot take and cross the border with is the sutras. So that's the first fail of his attempt of taking the sutra back. So his second idea was that, okay, why don't I then memorize the whole text? There's no way for other people to tell that I memorized this text. Just like how some people would cross the border nowadays without other people knowing, as refugees. So then his second attempt was that he tried to cross the border with the text memorized. However, just right about the time that he was about to cross the border, he tried to test himself and examine himself whether he remembered the whole thing or not. But at that time, he couldn't remember the whole text. Maybe it is because the road is maybe because at that time the commute was extremely difficult. It was very difficult to memorize. Anyhow, just right about the time he was about to cross the border, he felt that he can't memorize the whole text anymore. So he then went back and then tried to figure out a different way. At that time, ancient India had lots of craftsmanship, lots of trades. That's in fact quite advanced around that time. Even now, I think the Western countries even would renown and would revere those Indian scientists. So at that time, in the ancient history of India, in the ancient time of India, because of the craftsmanship that they have, so he used a tiny brush and wrote down the whole text on very, very thin skin of sheep. In fact, it's the skin that's between the flesh and the sheep skin. So it's really thin, like a film. And then someone said that it's not really the sheep's film, rather it is on white silk. And then he tried to hide it under his flesh. Of course, he has rather thick flesh under the thigh and around his buttocks, but he contemplated that maybe it's not really respectful towards the sutra. Therefore, he cut open his arm and hid such thin scrolls underneath his arm. In fact, when Phuntsog Rinpoche went to India, he gave different teachings such as the Pith Instruction or Heart Drop Advice of the Guru, as well as the Torch of Certainty, Luminous Essence, and so on. So at that time, Phuntsog Rinpoche gave lots of great teachings, and we all recorded in the magnetic tapes, those black tapes that we used to have around those times. We didn't really have CDs or iPad or any of the cell phones, none of those. So at that time, we had tapes, the cassettes. You probably don't even know what cassettes are. The young generation probably have no idea what those cassettes are. Anyhow, we would then record Phuntsog Rinpoche's teachings, and we didn't really know how to bring it back because we were afraid that the cassettes would be would be thrown out at the custom. So we took out the magnetic tape, the black film. That is the magnetic tape itself. Do you know what that's called in Chinese?
磁带芯儿。就知道吧，就是那个拆开以后
So
的话，
once
那个不是
you
一块
open the
那种
cassettes,
一跳的那个。
you know what I'm talking about,
然后
right?
那个
The
就
black
重新就是把它弄
magnetic
弄出来以
tapes
后
only,
卷
and
卷
so
起
we
来
took
然后
all
卷
of
起来以后
those
呢，
out,
就
and
就
then
我
we
们放在那个衣
rolled
服
those
那
up,
个裙子
and
的
then
这
we
个这个当中
sold it
然
up
后把它拆开，就是然后放
in
在
on
这个
our
然
robe
后就
skirt.
但是好像这个下身的话呢，
We
就有
felt
点不
that
公平，也
it's
不太
we
对。
should not
所以
then
我们
keep
这
it.
个出家人的裙
We
子
should
呢，
not
就是在
keep
在
it
摇这个
on the
地方，然
ground
后
because it's
放
not
在
really
这
respectful.
里就是
Therefore,
就
we
一
then
跳一跳
made
的，因为一
those
个子在里面
tapes
就可以卷起来。
around
然后
around
放在
our
这里，然后
waist,
有
and
把
then
它
sold
那
it
个
up.
就有重新缝上，就是这样啊。然后呢，就是过
That's
境，就是尼泊尔当时过境，我们从
in
香港
fact
这边过
how
来，
we
但是我们还是
smuggled
比
it
较担心，
through
就是然后
the
就他们就是有一些
Nepal
东西来
Nepal
就
custom
就
to
开
the
始检查了，但是那个
the
尼泊
Hong
尔的那
Kong.
个仪器就是很
I
差。
think at that time because of the Nepalese machine was really bad
所以
at
就
that
摸
time,
的
was
时候
not
呢，
really
就是到处
advanced.
摸一下，
Therefore,
就
we
这些
did
摸的
not
时候我们就有
get
点紧张，就是
we
这
did
样。
not get
那后来
caught
那个当时我们那
when
个过
they
境的时候
only
有一
kind
个
of
是这
patted
个
on
磁
us,
带
but when
的，
they
然后
pat
当
us
时那
around
个
our waist,
我
we
们那
got a
个
little nervous, so we
有一个叫
tried
鲁班
to
尼斯
keep our
他就
arms
卖了很
closed.
多的那个嘛。
At that time, we
就
had
是这个当时印度不没有，我们现在出家人这什么印度、柏林、
who
波尔
is
图很容易
doctor.
嘛。那个时候得不到，他就觉得是这个特别好，什么皮带啦、
He
裙子
really
啦
liked
然
all
后他
the
就但是心理操
Tibetan
纵没办法，
robes.
然后就是他就就有好几层那个
So
裙
at
子
that time,
然
he
后好几层皮带，就
he
是
bought many clothing. So he really liked those clothings from there, the robes, because we couldn't get them very conveniently in China. Therefore, he bought quite a bit.
啊，今天如果一次那么
He
胖啊，
wore many layers of clothing at that time. He probably wore 3 skirts as well as 3 shirts and so on. And Ponzo Rinpoche said, "How is the doctor so fat today?"
出家的那个时候我们还是确实在这里基本上都是
At that time in India and in Nepal, the clothing, the cloth are really well made, very soft, and they're really beautiful. So
然后日本干部就是
at that
就把
time,
意思就是把带了很多，结果我们
the
还是挺
doctor
顺利的
bought many clothings. I and the other couple, we focus quite a bit more in terms of
就像我
our
刚才部长讲的呢，
hiding of the
就是
cassette
波罗
tapes.
蜜多啊，这个
Anyhow
这个波罗蜜多的话呢，他
Pramiti
他
at
把那
that
个
time,
当时确实是很感染的那个，就
his
把这个就是
way
他
of
觉
or
得
the
是下
way
身的
that
这个
he
辱骂就
carried
这样
this
唱的话
sutra
对不
to
敬
China, in fact, is
就后来
very
他选
touching.
择这个
He
多
felt
藏
that
这
it
个
was very
入就是
disrespectful to
割开以后呢，
hide
就是把它
the
在一
sutra
起紧
in
卷
there
在
in his thigh or his buttock.
那个手臂
Therefore,
就
he
是
cut open his left
放在
arm
这个
and
里面
hid
然后放在里面
the
去紧绷
scrolls
上然后
of
这个伤口基本上
writings
好了以后的话呢，就是
underneath his
到那
own
个
flesh.
呃
And
快
then
活就
after
第三
his
次来
flesh
的时候
got
呢
healed,
过了所以
he
就
crossed the
他可能
border
是当时从
successfully,
从
finally
这
on the
个
third
大
time.
海就是
At
海
that
里
time, I
就
think he
就
must
是
have
上
traveled
然后
through
他
the
登陆
ocean,
的地方呢
and
就说
he
是
landed in
呃
China
这个
in
光州啊
Canton
这个光
province,
州
that is
到了
Guangzhou
这
right
个
now.
光州的时候呢，就可能当时有人也可能知
That
道
is the
了
southern part of
他也可能
China.
懂得一
I
些
think at that
懂
time
得
he
一些
probably
汉语啊，
knows
就
how to
是
speak
这
some
个
of the
波罗蜜多
Chinese,
呢，
and
就是
there are
他精
people
通
who
的
got to
四
know
种语
him.
言，然
In
后
fact,
到了
he
这
is
到
fluent
了这
in
个
4
光州之
different
后的话呢，
languages, it is said.
就是那个
So
当时
he
我最长
arrived
期见的
there.
话呢，就是那个叫方荣，
Uh,
就是方荣这
at
个
that
宰
time,
相
the
的话呢，就刚好
the
他就是做这个人色和
prime
做
minister of
地的
that
这个历史，他
province,
是一
his
个
name is
非
Fang
常
Rong,
虔
who
诚的国教，只
was
不过在他
a
在执政过程
cabinet, a
当中
high
呢，就是
cabinet
站队
of
站错了，就是后来呢，就
Empress Wu Zetian, who was the only empress in the Chinese history. And because of his mistake during the time of serving as a cabinet for the empress, he was then casted away and then sent to the southern part of Canton. And at that time, it was around 705 CE. So all the way from May of 707, they started translating. So Fang Rong then received him and really respected Pramiti, and they started translating this text. There are a few translators who worked together, and we will talk quite a bit more about the translation process tomorrow. So they, at that time, formed a translation group and started working together. At that time, when he cut open his flesh and took the scrolls out that is written with the sutra, the words are already really blurry because of the stains of the blood. Because it took a long time for him to travel all the way from the ocean, from India to Guangzhou, to Canton. Therefore, the words are already soaked in his blood. And there was no other techniques that was available at that time. So the words are already really blurry. You cannot tell what it was anymore. And then at that time, the premier, his wife, some said it was his wife who was mute, and some said it was his servant, anyhow, someone who's working in his family who's mute. But at that time, when she saw that all the words are blurry, she all of a sudden started speaking, saying that you can use human milk to then revive the texts. And then once all the words started appearing because of the wash of human milk, they started translating on this text. So sometimes I feel Pramiti, he had never come to China before. He had no other way of carrying this except of hiding it inside of his own flesh. He himself then cut open his own flesh and took it to a foreign country that he had no familiar person, had no friends or family members or anyone he knows. So, how about us? The great masters, their spirit or their aspiration of bringing the Dharma text to other places are quite inspiring. I think last year I watched this movie where it talks about the story of how Pramiti brought the Surangama Sutra in China. I will then show this video clip to you.
Namo sarva buddha bodhisattva bhya namo saptanam samyak sambuddha kotinam sasyarvaka sanghamna namo loke arahantanam namo sartapandanam namo sakrita kaminam namo annakaminam namo loke samyak katanam samyak pratipananam namo devarashinam Namo Sita Vidyadhara Rashinam Sappanugraha Samartanam Namo Brahmane Namo Indraya Namo Bhagavade Rudraya Umapade Sahiyaya Namo Bhagavade Narayanaya Lakshmi Panjamahamudra Namaskritaya Namo Bhagavade Mahakalaya Tripura Tradashura Sena Praharana Rajaya Tathakataya Arahate Samyak Sambuddhaya Namo Bhagavade
这经卷一取出，正逢合伤口，请随我来。南无佛，忍辱果然能容是血字啊！弟子听闻，前朝智已大师为求此经，曾筑高台，向天竺国方向虔诚叩拜了整整18载，仍未有因缘见其真容。而今我们竟亲眼见证了这原文范本的楞严真經。
若無巴拉密啲法師拋臂藏經，捨身東渡，令嚴聖教不知何年何月，方能與我東土眾生結緣。感恩十方如來，調御隨蓮。
Indeed, the previous masters, the spirit and their devotion towards the propagation of the Dharma is very inspiring. In fact, during my preparation of this class, I teared up quite a few times. I think the followers, that is us, we should also study from their spirit of disseminate the Dharma. Nowadays, everything is very convenient. Books or digital version. In fact, for people who have their text or whosoever is reading the Dharma text, you may feel that this is so easy. But I think we should really contemplate how these books, these teachings are propagated, how these texts are brought to different places. At the end, in fact, Pramiti, right after translating this text, he didn't stay in China to receive all the fames or so on. In fact, he went back to his own country to then receive the punishment because he took the text to China, smuggled the text to China. Therefore, he went back to his country to receive the punishment. I think now back in 2010, the Sanskrit version was discovered, and it is then reserved in Henan province. And back in 2017, it is then moved to a museum. There are some Western scholars who insist that this text is not a genuine sutra, but it is because that it doesn't have a Sanskrit text, and now the Sanskrit text is found. In fact, the cabinet of Fangrong, later on, after this text was translated, he took this text to the palace, and then it was not really taken very seriously at that time. But later on, there was another master. He really found the value, discovered the value of this text, and then started propagating this text, and that's how it is disseminated so widely in China and in many different places. Especially, I think this sutra is very familiar to the Han Chinese. And for you Han Chinese, you should appreciate this teaching that is then available to you. At the same time, in fact, we should look at this sutra not as some kind of medicine that is only a valuable cure for the Chinese, because there are the Western medicine and Eastern medicines, then they work on all different kind of people. The Chinese medicine, if used right, it could be very valuable for the Westerners as well, and vice versa. Therefore, we should then propagate this sutra. This teaching is included by many masters in their texts. For example, it was then included. The sutra is then included in the Surangama mantra is included in the chanting of the morning practice as well as evening practice in the Han tradition. According to a Qing a poet, he wrote in his poetry saying that after reading Surangama Sutra, I lost interest completely in any other books in this world because everything that's written in all the worldly books are just rubbish. This is in fact quite well known, this verse. Master Yuan Yin, he was the first committee member of a committee of the Buddhist committee in China. In fact, first time he read this text was when he was 20 years old, and he had a great devotion towards this text and vowed to study this text. He probably studied from many masters, but I think he studied from many masters. It was not a particular master that he associated himself with. Anyhow, he completely relied on the Surangama Sutra. He, in fact, wrote many little paper slips that has his questions about this Surangama Sutra written down and then taped it all around his room. And he practiced and studied it until he reached 68 of age. That's when all of the questions that he taped on in his room, all of his questions are resolved, and he took down all of the question slips. Just like how the students, they would use yellow stickers, the post-its, and they would post all the different questions. For people who don't like studies, they would then post different celebrities' pictures. Some teacher used to tell me, I can just tell what the student's personality is when I walk around in their room or when they see their room. I think in the West, especially, people really like the yellow post-its. Anyhow, Master Yuan Yin is similar like that. He had all the post-its on the four walls of his room that is full of his room, and on each post-it he wrote down his different questions about Surangama Sutra. And by the age of 68, he finally resolved all the questions that he had and posted in his room, and he sat down and wrote a commentary on Surangama Sutra. I read it before, in fact. I think just about the title, he wrote many chapters about simply the title, the Surangama Sutra. So some of you, if you have the opportunity, you can then read into his explanation, his commentary. But maybe because of the time limits, I don't think I will explain too much about I won't be so explicit about the teachings such as Master Yuan Yin. I think in the ancient time or in the older times, lots of people would enjoy the teaching, listening to the teachings. And they would take it as a time that they would completely enjoy themselves with a spiritual experience or spiritual teaching and guidance. But nowadays, the modern people are completely different because they would have to turn off their phones, they can't read other information, they can only listen to the class, and they feel listening to a class is a burden. However, I myself feel that listening to a class and expounding the Dharma is extremely important. Especially on this text, according to Master Han Shan, he said that without reading the Lotus Sutra, one will not realize the Buddha's heartfelt compassion of liberating beings. Without studying the Surangama Sutra, one will not understand the crucial point of spiritual practice to detach from illusion and attain enlightenment. So, without studying and reading the Lotus Sutra, you won't know how the Buddha's compassion is And without studying the Surangama Sutra, you won't know the how to detach yourself from all the delusions of practice. So the practices that is taught all the way through, all the way from being a mundane being to attain enlightenment and stepping on the path, all of these kind of business instructions are taught in the Surangama Sutra. Especially, I think the Surangama Sutra, if this sutra is said to be the first one to be vanished in this world, and at the time when this sutra vanish in this world, the Dharma will also vanish in this world. If we propagate Surangama Sutra, especially if we propagate the sutra well, the Maras will be extremely upset about it. Therefore, the key point, the key of the propagation and prosperity of the Dharma is the Surangama Sutra. If the Surangama Sutra is propagated well in this world, then the teaching of the Dharma is well propagated. If it's not, then the Dharma is not either. According to the Qianlong Emperor's Tripitaka, there was a sutra included in it. It is the Sutra of Fading the Dharma, as well as the Treatise on the Great Perfection of Wisdom. It both stated that the Surangama Sutra and the Surangama Sutra will vanish at first, and soon after, the 12 divisions of the Buddhist canons will disappear until there is no longer any words of the Dharma remain in this world. Also, the robes of Buddhist monastics would naturally fade into white naturally. You can barely even tint or dye the clothing into yellow and red anymore. So, when we think of the teachings of the Buddha, when you want to propagate the teaching of the Buddha, you should then propagate the Surangama Sutra. In fact, after the class, we have this after-class discussion group, and we call that part of the discussion group as the blossoms all over the world. In fact, during this part of the discussion group, I think this is quite auspicious if we can then discuss the Surangama Sutra, and we should then be able to propagate the Dharma into different places of the different corners of the world with the different languages used, and make sure that this teaching is understood across different languages as well as the culture. If we only use the Chinese language, Tibetan language, and the English language, it is not enough, because the teaching of Surangama and the power of Surangama cannot be propagated widely if we do not then try to propagate this teaching to different parts of the world. According to the Treatise on the Great Perfection of Wisdom, it says that the Surangama Samadhi, which in Chinese means meditation of being skilled in differentiation, empowers one to recognize the marks and depth of all stages of samadhi. At that time, Surangama Samadhi in Chinese it means meditation of being skilled in differentiation, or also it says that Surangama in Tibetan it means that the great with a great heroic path. In fact, Shuran is one word. Some translation it means very or extremely, but in Tibetan it means the top or the head of the head of the Buddha. That is the realization. That is of the highest realization of the Buddha. So the top of the head of the Buddha's samadhi, that is courage, that is heroic, that is very heroic. And meditation of being skilled in differentiation empowers one to recognize the marks and depth of all stages of samadhi, just like how a general knows precisely the strength of his troops. Besides, bodhisattvas absorbing in such samadhi will not be threatened by demons and the maras of destructive emotions. So, once we receive the samadhi of Surangama, in fact, we really need such kind of samadhi because there are lots of sidetracks on the path, and if we do not know how to differentiate those kind of sidetracks, then we would easily make grave mistakes, which would lead only to failure. However, if we have this Surangama's teaching method and guidance, then we won't be threatened by demons and maras anymore. Another metaphor, it says that there is a treasure of general. The treasure of general is employed by the universal monarch, and this treasure of general can destroy everything. And Surangama Sutra is just like that treasure or jewel of general that could destroy all the maras and destructive spirits. Anyhow, I would like to first warn you. We will definitely meet some obstacles along the way, but I don't think you need to worry too much, because I know that Mara would first of all destroy the ones who seems to be weak, just like just like wolves would then first attack the weakest among the herd. So for those people who lack diligence, who lack devotion, who lack steadfastness, then you probably would be more prone to be attacked by the Mara. But for those of you who are not like that, and you don't have to worry too much. Even if you will encounter some difficulties, I think if you supplicate to the Padmasambhava and supplicate to the Guru and so on, you will be fine, because through the blessings of the lineage masters, as well as the Padmasambhava, as well as our compassion and wisdom, when the maras and demons do create those destructive forces towards us, then we can try first to use our compassion to try to turn their mind into the Dharma. And if we can't, then we can use the wrathful force of Padmasambhava. So that's how we should deal with the obstacles that may or may not occur during the process of Surangama Sutra. Surangama Sutra is considered as a very profound and deep teaching in the Chinese region. Lots of masters who, in fact, already propagate this teaching quite widely. I myself won't consider myself as a master, but at least when I encounter some obstacles and threats, I don't give up easy. Even if only 5 or 10 people listen to my teachings, I will continue to finish this teaching. Of course, that is when I don't have any obstacles of my lifespan. Other than those kind of obstacles, I won't stop because of some people or because of some obstacles. I consider this opportunity of studying is in fact quite precious. I think having this opportunity to study with everyone is quite rare, and I really cherish this. There are people who only. There are lots of people who appear on the first day, and then I think for such kind of people, they only appear for the first class to just listen to the stories and just peek and see how and what this class is about. And for this kind of people, I would just say bye-bye, and I don't really expect too much of you. When I start teaching any kind of teachings, such as Lotus Sutra and so on, the first class is rather we have rather quite a large audience, but slowly that number will decrease. But we will maintain a rather very steady crowd of people who listen to this teaching. And there are people who would give up everything else except the Dharma. They would then cherish the opportunity of listening to the Dharmas at the most. Maybe we'll give the teaching of this Dharma within 1 year, maybe a little bit extended. I have no idea yet. But let's see. Under such auspicious conditions, under such auspicious connections that we share with one another, I'm not sure if everyone would be able to complete this teaching all the way from the first till the last class. I myself, I think that some of the conditions, some of the auspicious connections that I have with Phuntsog Rinpoche, I am very grateful to the protectors and to my auspicious connection to Phuntsog Rinpoche. I fully received all his oral transmissions and teachings. Anyhow, if you do not have the opportunity to fully receive these teachings on time or live, then through different methods and different skillful means such as internet and through the recordings and so on, I really wish you to then fully complete this course through different methods. Anyhow, I really hope that we all strive our best to complete this teaching, because this is a teaching that is exchanged by the previous masters' flesh and blood. So we should really cherish such kind of teaching, such kind of sutra. Anyhow, my hope for you is that I really wish that you could maintain this genuine and sincere urge and curiosity and longing towards the learning of the sutra. I really hope and wish that everyone could finish and complete this teaching. We indeed chanted the protectors chanting at the beginning to other sutras and shastras. Let it be Uttara Tantra Shastra and so on, and Surangama Sutra and other kind of sutras. I really hope that you could chant many Vajrasattva mantra as well as Padmasambhava mantra. So why don't we chant this together? So let's chant the Padmasambhava mantra and then
Mao Badran Garaba Masardo, 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 Mao Badran Garaba Mao Badran Garaba Masardo, 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 Mao Badran Garaba Mao Badran Garaba Masardo, Mao Badran Garaba Masardo, Mao Badran Garaba Masardo, Mao Badran Garaba Mao Badran Garaba Masardo, Mao Badran Garaba Masardo, Mao Badran Garaba Masardo, Artsig Nartsig Namo Bangavade, Babazo, Artsig Nartsig Namo Bangavade, Babazo, Artsig Nartsig Namo Bangavade, Artsig Nartsig Namo Bangavade, Babazo, Artsig Nartsig Namo Bangavade, Babazo, Artsig Nartsig Namo Bangavade, Artsig Nartsig Namo Bangavade, Martin Namo Banga, the Om Babazo, Martin Namo Banga, the Om Martin Namo Banga.